Hey y'all, Casey here. I love stories, all different kinds. One area of storytelling that I've really connected with over the years is speculative fiction. Speculative fiction is fiction that reimagines a past that never was, or imagines a possible future. Some of the most popular genres of speculative fiction are steampunk and cyberpunk. One of my favorite types of speculative fiction is solarpunk. Unlike its older speculative fiction siblings, solarpunk is much less well known, which is a shame, because I think it offers something that most other genres don't. Solarpunk offers hope. The term solarpunk was first used in 2008 on Tumblr. Since then, it has found its home in small niches on the internet. It really hasn't gotten much mainstream exposure, which has led it to remain this small niche thing. I think it's time that changed. I think it's time we shine some light on solarpunk. No, I will not apologize for that pun. What is solarpunk? Well, that's a little hard to pin down for a few reasons. For one, the genre is so young that it's still trying to figure out what exactly it is. Talking about what is or isn't solarpunk also runs into the difficulty of trying to describe an entire genre. Something that inevitably will either be too strict and exclude things that might have elements of solarpunk without being completely solarpunk, or too vague, in which case far too many things that are vaguely environmentally minded get roped in. It also doesn't help that there aren't definitive works for the genre. Solarpunk doesn't have a Neuromancer or a Blade Runner. It doesn't have a Wild Wild West or a 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. There are some solarpunk works, but I'll get into those a bit later. That disclaimer aside, I'll begin by talking about what solarpunk is to me. For me, solarpunk is all about hope. If I had to make a slogan for solarpunk, it would be hope as rebellion. Solarpunk dares to dream of a brighter future. It dares to dream of utopia. Solarpunk is not dark and dismal, but rather it is bright and hopeful. Solarpunk imagines how things can get better. Specifically, solarpunk looks at how technology and nature can work together. This idea of a hopeful future is such a refreshing idea to me. So much science fiction and even contemporary fiction is so depressing, so pessimistic. Setting things in a post-apocalyptic world is commonplace. Dystopia seems to be in nearly all contemporary stories. I think that is lazy writing. I think that it can be difficult to imagine a better future, and it takes hard work to think up a way that things can be better. This seems to be related to the idea that humans have no trouble imagining all the horrors of hell, but if you ask someone to actually describe heaven, they struggle. Solarpunk is not Liberty spikes made out of leaves. I don't see it as embracing the grunginess of punk, but rather the rebellion aspect of punk. And for solarpunk, the rebellion comes not in the form of destruction and armed revolution, but rather it comes in the form of hope. In a world where dystopia and post-apocalyptic stories are the norm, it is an incredibly rebellious thing to envision a brighter future. When despair is the order of the day, hope becomes punk. In a solarpunk world, we live in harmony with the natural world, instead of trying to dominate it, control it, or be dominated or controlled by it. A solarpunk world lives in tandem with nature, so that both humans and the rest of the environment can live to their fullest potential. To me, It's not some hippy-dippy, kumbaya, hold hands and sing stuff. Rather, it's about respecting the land and at the same time, not fearing technology. So often, tech and nature are framed as being at odds, but Solarpunk envisions harmony between them. It's not about isolated communes, it's about planetary living, whether that's in a city or a small town. Teamwork is important in a Solarpunk world, and not just as it relates to tech and nature. In order for a Solarpunk world to work, people have to work together. In a Solarpunk world, everyone helps out and pitches in. People help each other, but not in the form of entitlements and handouts. Rather, people help each other by investing in their community and not taking advantage of one another. Visually, Solarpunk incorporates a green, blue, gold, and brown color palette. Solarpunk-looking things tend to mimic nature. Stained glass, Art Nouveau, and sun catchers are all common themes in Solarpunk worlds. I could go on, but really, for me, it all boils down to hope, respect for the environment, teamwork, and environmentally centered technological innovation. Some examples of Solarpunk things that currently exist include the Garden by the Bay in Singapore, solar panels, Mystic Gardens in Tulum, Mexico, wind turbines, animal road crossings, such as the ones in Banff, Alberta, Frank Lloyd Wright houses, like Falling Water, Sustainable City in Dubai, mini wind turbines for individual homes, gray water repurposing systems, biomimicry, such as climbing pads capable of supporting the weight of a human, which mimic gecko feet, aerodynamic bullet trains mimicking the shape of a bird's beak, and Velcro, which was inspired by the hooks used by some plants to propagate their seeds. Some examples of Solarpunk things that do not yet exist to my knowledge, but I hope one day will, include parkour courses set up around the city that accelerate you through them when you land different moves correctly, which would encourage foot traffic over motorized traffic, as well as individual fitness, bioluminescent trees or bioluminescent smaller plants that light paths instead of street lamps, produce and flowers predominantly covering buildings, yielding goods for anyone to take as they walk by, and space travel in bioships or biovehicles generally. As I mentioned before, there aren't really seminal Solarpunk works yet, but here are some pieces of media that, in some way or another, could be considered Solarpunk. For books, you have The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin, Swamp Thing by various artists and writers, but especially the Alan Moore run, The Elsewhere Prince by Mobius, or really most things by Mobius, Island by Aldous Huxley, Glass and Gardens by Serena Ulibarri and Wendy Nickel, and Sunvault, which is an anthology of Solarpunk pieces by a number of creators. For TV, you have Star Trek, especially The Next Generation. Voyager is still my favorite though. And the Waters of Mars episode of Doctor Who. For movies, you have Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Arrival, Black Panther, and Treasure Planet. For music, there are a surprising number of playlists here on YouTube with various interpretations of what their creators feel is Solarpunk music. There are other Solarpunk things out there, but at least that's a start. Solarpunk is not just a future thing. You can be a Solarpunk right now. How, you ask? Here are some ways. Buy local. Supporting your local business whenever possible helps to invest in your community and has a litany of other benefits, like generally being more environmentally friendly. Support renewable energy, whether that's by installing solar panels if you have the means, or opting for renewable energy programs where available. In Portland, at least, this is an option. Help start your local community garden, or, if you already have one, see what you can do to help it grow. Get involved in your local politics. Again, you'll be investing in your community. Make something Solarpunk. Contribute to the conversation. Spread the hope. Sometimes, when I talk about Solarpunk, people ask how anyone could write an interesting story set in a utopian world. Where is the conflict? As I said before, writing a Solarpunk story isn't easy. It takes work, but it's not impossible. I think stories of exploration and first contact are ripe grounds for Solarpunk settings. Even a simple interpersonal drama could be made more interesting by setting it in a Solarpunk world. Just because we live in harmony with nature doesn't mean humans suddenly stop having their differences. I actually think you can tell beautiful stories with little to no conflict as well. In fact, there is a whole genre of manga that I love and will probably talk about at a later time, called healing manga, that generally has no conflict. As I mentioned earlier, this is all my take on Solarpunk, and that is what I wanted to focus on, because those things are what resonate with me and improve my life. There is, however, a different school of Solarpunk that has sprung up in recent years that I feel I need to discuss as well. It's a school that, to me at least, has less hope and less whimsy. It's more grounded in our present world than in the future. People who engage with Solarpunk in this way tend to set their worlds in post-apocalyptic settings that are a result of catastrophic climate change. Sometimes these stories focus on small communes who are up against the big evil cities, or perhaps they are set in the great desert plains of the near-future American Midwest. These creators have more of an emphasis on anarchy or the rejection of law, prepper lifestyle, off-grid living, direct political action, identity politics, and building up from the ruins of our present world. They believe the future will be a pessimistic place. Creators of these stories assert that they are not leaving the most important part of Solarpunk, hope, behind, but rather having hope in the face of the inevitable apocalypse. To them, envisioning any future for humanity at all, any continued existence, is hopeful. For me, this type of story or world is not Solarpunk. Without the unflinching optimism and hope, it just doesn't do it for me. For me, Solarpunk is non-apocalyptic. It's not Mad Max with solar panels. It's Star Trek. I've even seen some creators urge people to stop writing stories in favor of more practical, direct action. I believe stories have immense power. I think stories can sometimes have far more power than political organizing. And that's coming from someone with a history in political organizing. It actually really bothers me when people discount the value of stories in this way. For me, this kind of thinking is exactly the kind of thing Solarpunk is rebelling against. It just goes to show how pervasive and infectious our tendency towards pessimism and catastrophizing is. To me, Solarpunk imagines how things can get better, not just how we will cope with the environment. At the end of the day, Solarpunk is, like all words, a made-up word. It can mean whatever to whomever. But to me, it means hope. It means creating the world we want to live in. My hope is that Solarpunk could be a starting point for something bigger. Something that could help propel a shift away from our contemporary sense of defeatism and into a brighter tomorrow. I believe that humans are capable of incredible things. With just a little hope and kindness in our hearts, there's no telling what all we can do. Until next time.